In a world where the answers to all of the routine problems in the world are free in your pocket, your unique value is literally you. It's your voice. It's how you would think about this problem differently than anyone else. And if that sounds like some sort of a weird Hallmark card, this has been 25 years of my career solving problems intentionally different than others. Not because I'm the greatest genius in the world, but because the easy stuff had already been tried.
TDW fans, we are delighted to have Dr. Vivienne Ming here with us today, a renowned AI expert, neuroscientist, and self-proclaimed mad scientist exploring how to use AI to expand human capacity and make people better. You may have seen her TED Talk, Making a Better Person, read the numerous interviews she's given about the future of work, or heard about Socos, the company she co-founded, which leverages AI-driven research and inventions to maximize human potential for companies, global policy, and educational reform. Vivienne, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today.
It's great to join you. I always enjoy chatting about my favorite thing in the world, which is me and my work.
Well, I promise you it's going to be our favorite thing today as well. That is for sure.
Most of the stories around generative AI today are all about productivity and efficiency. But in one of our previous chats, you said AI is an astonishing tool for understanding people. And we thought we have to know more about that. So talk to us about how we can use AI to make us better humans and even improve humanity.
You're right. Like the whole story right now seems to be, imagine how much faster you can get your job done. I've even seen a YouTube channel about people being excited about being able to write an entire novel in a day using Claude or some specialized tools. And all I can feel is what a missed opportunity that we're in a world where, an AI could write a novel on its own. So where's your voice in this process? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's always been the other way around. I get introduced, as you introduced me here, as an AI expert. I study people. I was a cognitive neuroscience student as an undergrad. As a grad student, my PhD work was psychology and computational neuroscience. AI was a way for me to understand brains. It was a way for me to understand the difference between a real and a fake smile. It's all in the supraorbital muscles around your eye. But I think if you actually look at some of the most exciting applications of AI today, it is, for example, exploring where innovation comes from by being able to do something no human being could do, which is read every dissertation ever written and analyze the patterns of the most innovative, the ones that really change their fields versus the ones that don't. Things like that there clearly is a story about a productivity gain. Imagine the army of people necessary to have read all of those papers. But really at its heart, it's about understanding people and discovering these patterns. And, what's exciting in this moment in time is to be able to do an analysis like that up until, frankly, even 2020 required someone like me being able to program out a complex neural network and make the programming tools necessary to crawl the web and collect data. And now, on some level, in theory, anybody could have a chat with GPT or Gemini and get some of those same deep insights. But again, it's a lot less about how it speeds up the slides I have to do for a presentation this week for me, and so much more about the fact that in my pocket is the loyal opposition that can analyze my essay and find every nitpicky thing that my adversaries will find wrong with it. That can be, and that frustrating audience that just isn't getting what I'm trying to say, so that I can reframe my thinking and understand another person better. I like to call this productive friction. Instead of productivity gains, what really excites me about AI is how it can challenge us to be better.
That's fantastic. I want to pivot even deeper into the lane of work you were talking about, serving as a critic and productive friction. You had a great quote in a recent interview where you said the future of work in an AI-rich world is augmented intelligence. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Augmented intelligence isn't a new idea. I think it might actually have its roots in World War II, in thinking about someone staring at a radar for 8 hours a day, and which is nothing that a human being can actually do, but was a job for 80 years. How do we actually use machines and computational systems to make us better at the things we're already doing, rather than, in economic terms, we may talk about substitution or just replacement, where instead of a human being involved at all, we can just have a machine do it, which, by the way, is the current world of radar operators. Humans really aren't built for this job, so it is better to have a machine do it, but not the kind of things that are exciting to me. Again, we live in a world where in my pocket is the answer to every question I might ask, at least every question that found its way into the language corpus on which these massive models have been trained. So up through last year or the year before, represented richly enough that it really got into the parameters of these models. It's all there. If I just want to know a routine piece of knowledge, even an esoteric one, I got this weird thing. Literally right now, this finger and my thumb are cold with respect to my other fingers. It took me so much sleuthing using old-fashioned Google to come up with the term Raynaud syndrome. Turns out it's an idiopathic thing that people have, particularly women. And it's not terribly serious. That's great. It took me a couple of hours to figure that out. Interestingly, when I went in and saw a doctor, they didn't know that phrase. So the other day I asked Gemini and it immediately spit it out. This is the only diagnosis it came up with. So this is the thing. My doctor didn't know the phrase when I had to do an old-fashioned search. God forbid it's the 1970s and we actually had to look things up at the library. It took a while for an even educated person to come across this term for free in my pocket. It's what you do with that knowledge that matters. So I'm a mad scientist. I don't accept that answer, that this is just idiopathic, which is essentially fancy speak for we don't know why it's the way it is and we're not going to do anything about it. So going in and actually figuring that out. Well, it turns out there is no model out there that can do that for me. The latest one is Claude 3. Claude 3 can't tell me why I have Raynaud syndrome. It can't give me an answer as to what to do about it that isn't right out of the Mayo Clinic's website. It needs a human being to explore that unknown. And that's one example of augmented intelligence. My ability to explore its repository of facts. But I actually have an even more tangible, if nerdy, example. And trust me, nobody is going to want me to actually walk through the fine details of this example. But I had a somewhat esoteric statistics question. I had two complex linear regression equations, and I wanted to know the confidence interval of the product of two model parameters. No one cares. Immediately, 90% of your audience has tuned out. Because somehow I'm old enough to think of this like radio rather than a podcast. But I needed to know the answer for some work that I was doing. And I was at the time using Bard, which came out before Gemini, and that's all Google's new language models. And it gave me the wrong answer. So did GPT. But I knew they were the wrong answers. So I was able to push it. Even though I didn't know what the answer was, I recognized it was taking the easy route and giving me the wrong answer. Why? Because before I had the terrible idea of starting companies, I was a professor. And the number one experience you have as a professor working with graduate students is that they know everything and they understand nothing. And it's your job to provide that understanding and their job to learn from it. And so I treat these large language models like they're my grad students. I never trust what they say, but in what they say is the start of what I need. So I led it through this process of breaking down the problem and thinking through the pieces. In the end, I literally had the equation that specified, the answer to what I needed to know and the lines of Python code to run it on my data, neither of which I could have produced on my own and nor which it could have done on its own, as demonstrated by the fact that it gave the wrong answer initially. Only together did we arrive at an answer that neither of us had. And I say us, it's so easy to anthropomorphize these and kind of humanize them. I love these tools and generative models for images and other things. But understand, these are not thinking machines, not in the sense that we're thinking machines. If you get, much like my grad students, they know everything, but understand nothing. They're the world's most complex autocomplete program. And what is astonishing is how far that gets you. It truly is a powerful tool, but its unique power is actually to make us better, not to replace us.
It's fantastic answer. And it relates to something that we were talking about in our previous conversation, which was this Harvard BCG study, right? So in that, BCG consultants were using generative AI, and it was noted that they were producing 40%, roughly 40% or higher quality results, and also doing things faster than those who were not using AI. But on the other side of that, the consultants that were using AI were much less adept at making inference or coming up with practical solutions than those who didn't use AI at all. And that reinforces this point that you're making about, GPT as something that knows everything and understands nothing. I'd love to go a little bit further with this and talk about how do you encourage people to understand where and when to push back and use the data as kind of a starting point, but then iterate from there or understand where the machine learning models are flawed, or you need to really add your own inference or point of view, because that's a tricky thing. You're very experienced. You've been using algorithms for 20 years, so you're very experienced with this. And a lot of people, that are listening are just getting their feet wet, and they think, "Hey, I got this answer from ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and it's gospel. It must be right." So, how do you train people to for the kind of critical thinking to discern what these answers are and where to go with our own human ability, I guess?
Understanding the limitations. Again, with my grad students or my employees at my companies, when they come in and I'm hiring them to be a machine learning researcher, some of my questions are often basic probability theory, because, at least I would be shocked how often these people, sometimes with PhDs in their field, don't really understand why these tools do what they do. So that's one is, regardless of whether it's AI or not, why does the thing you're using, why does it do what it does? Why does this brush, with a certain kind of paint, produce a smooth pattern, and with another kind, you can see the threads of the brush? If you understood that, then you could understand the incredible diversity of paintings you could make just by using different materials. I think a master painter obviously either implicitly or explicitly understands that. So this is just mastering your tools. And it is a tool. That's the best way to think about this. The other is completely independent of tools. When I start a new project, I start with a simple assumption. If the problem being brought to me was easily and obviously solvable, if your first idea would work to solve this problem, it would already have been solved. So forget about your first idea. Assume smart people have worked on this problem before, at least as smart as you, and haven't succeeded. So let's just skip all the stuff they would have done. And I think we might be shocked to learn, even among scientists and financial analysts looking for the next stock bet, how much we heard around safe answers, how uncomfortable we are with uncertainty and going out and trying something genuinely new. And if you just start with this, as a rule, maybe the right answer is a safe answer, but you know what? Someone else is going to discover that if they haven't yet. I'm going to go look in a dangerous place, a place I think no one but me would ever bother looking. And the kind of problems that come my way through Socos Labs and my new nonprofit, The Human Trust, are things like, Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day and her doctors can't help. Please save her life. Dr. Ming, my son can't enter REM sleep. It's like a case out of House. I looked it up. There's like 5 people in the world that have this condition where they can't enter REM sleep, but they're still alive. Or our country is doing everything the World Bank is telling us. And our education scores go up every year for our kids, but nobody's hiring our citizens. Help us figure out what's wrong. And whenever those problems come my way, and working on them is why I indulgently call myself a professional mad scientist, because if I already knew the solution, it wouldn't be science. And if anyone else was trying our approach, it wouldn't be mad. And really leaning into that in a world, again, where the answers to all of the routine problems in the world are free in your pocket, your unique value is literally you. It's your voice. It's how you would think about this problem differently than anyone else. And if that sounds like some sort of a weird Hallmark card, this has been 25 years of my career solving problems intentionally different than others, not because I'm the greatest genius in the world, but because the easy stuff had already been tried. And my sole value was to come in and be a weirdo and try something different. Well, now all of our careers is to be the weirdest version of ourselves and bring something unique to those problems.
Finally. Yeah.
I love that, because we usually talk about becoming the next best version of yourself, but now we've got a new call to action, the next weirdest version of yourself. Let's do it. That's
that
awesome.
is so
I promised
refreshing.
that I had a third point, and it was about understanding the limitations. And I think maybe I caught that on the first one through. I almost forgot to say it, though. I promised you I would forget, and I literally did. But really, just understanding in the case, for example, of the BCG Harvard study, is we're human. We want to think that we're smart and we're highly educated, that we're hyper competent. So are these BCG employees. So are the many studies looking at doctors, finding that they either completely ignore what AI tells them or they simply automatically do what it tells them. Mm-hmm. And we fall into these traps of, again, thinking at everything as productivity gain or not. And if it would be faster for a machine to do it, give it to the machine, just take what it gives you back and move forward. And if instead we really think about, is this thing I'm working on so valuable that a human should be working on it, then it should be in your voice. It shouldn't be spitting out a bunch of slides. It can help you do the analysis, but that shouldn't become the report you're giving your client or your bosses. That should be your unique contribution. And what they found in that paper was essentially that even these highly educated, ambitious consultants just train themselves to stop going deep into the problems. It got so comfortable with GPT giving them all the right answers that when the problems shift from the routine to the creative, they didn't shift with it and take over the task. And in that sense, again, understanding your strengths, the limitations of these tools, it's a transformative way, I think, of working with this, because now I'm not talking so much about how do you cut your writing time in half. I'm talking about how do you use the existing writing time to produce something not just better, but unique. Something that's a unique value add in the space that you're contributing to.
This is a huge watch out here for everybody leaning into these tools and thinking of them as a cure-all to problem solving, because what you're talking about is kind of the danger of a potential laziness that this can create in our ability to do the quality critical thinking that we are uniquely suited to do.
Well, there's an interesting subtext, not just to the BCG study, but almost every study on productivity gains from large language models. And now, of course, large multimodal models that are expanding things even further. And that note is almost all of the benefits are captured by relatively less experienced, early career, or otherwise underperforming individuals. So when you say that there was roughly a 40% gain, the more, when they broke it down by who was below the median in productivity and who was above the median without AI, almost all of those gains were from the people that were below median performance. And that is absolutely universally replicated in all of these research papers. Programmers, call center workers, professional writers, almost all of the productivity gains are captured on the lower end of the skill and experience. And that alone is an interesting signal. Notably, most of the authors of those papers have really said, hey, this is a feature. It reduces the inequality in productivity across individuals. But if you actually look at what that's meant, both in the marketplace, but also in a field where AI has been studied for decades, in education, there's some real worry that we might have here. So in the marketplace, what you see is, for example, among freelancers, coders, designers, and writers, that it's really begun to eat into their labor share, and almost entirely at the higher skill. So higher skill workers have been seeing drops in the amount of work they're getting in the freelance space. Lower skill workers, empowered by these amazing AI tools, produce just as good a work. And that's an interesting dynamic. Being better at your job no longer seems to be a value add, at least at the routine parts of your job. But if now we add in decades of learning from education, particularly AI tutors, which I will say Sam Altman specifically called out in front of Congress. Imagine every kid has an AI tutor. Well, we can, because it's been studied for years. It's notable that Mr. AI doesn't seem to know this. And the results of those studies are those kids don't learn. If AI gives them the answer, they look the same on a post-test that they looked on a pre-test. They don't learn anything in between. And it almost seems paradoxical. And if you're a brilliant, entrepreneur, it may seem inexplicable. But the one context in which AI really added value is when it never gave answers. It only gave the students context, which means it's literally withholding information from them. And yet the students that got less information ended up not just learning more than the ones that received it, learning more than the students that didn't have an AI tutor at all. So AI does add a value, but you have to understand what it's doing and why. So if you're a builder of these tools, not just a user, think hard about what you're building and how it's going to interact with the actual human beings using it. And in that context, I bet those BCG employees, had they had an AI that never, it gave them context, it never really gave them the answers, it didn't produce the slides, but it talked them through. It was maybe the loyal opposition, for example, that productive friction. I virtually guarantee they wouldn't have fallen into the trap of doing worse on the creative side of the tasks, because it would still have been on them to be fully participating.
Saul Khan, in his recent TED Talk, was talking about that in the Khan Academy version of generative AI that they built. They intentionally created a deepening question that would push back against the student and see how much the student actually knew. So it never gave the direct answer. It would cause a deeper conversation. And because, it's natural language, the student would be responding back with what they knew, offering that set of data back to whatever the generative model was, and then the generative model would come back and prompt again to deepen the conversation. And that's the only time I've seen a practical example of what you're talking about. Don't just give me the answer. Let's go on a journey together and explore this thing and see what you know.
There is exciting work in this space. I hope it's coming across. I am both thrilled at the potential, but also wary at the idea that it's a magic wand that just fixes problems and makes us better. And again, we don't love living in uncertainty. Either AI, I should go all in, or we shouldn't use it at all, seems to be what people are selling. And instead, we should really understand people and understand what's the best version. The same way I always say you shouldn't hire for individuals, you should hire for teams. What's the best team to work on this problem? Think of it that way as well. The AI is another component of that team. What's going to make the whole thing better? And in that sense, as paradoxical as it sounds, a teammate that integrates and is provocative may be the single best value. And in my work, we actually built a little AI called the Matchmaker that never directly interacts with people. It instead creates and destroys social connections to maximize the collective intelligence of the team. And we found frequently two people needed to stop talking to each other, not because it was somehow bad or corrosive for them to talk to each other, but because they weren't being sufficiently skeptical. We needed to break them apart so that they wouldn't settle for just this simple, easy answer that the two of them were headed towards. You broke them apart and they began to ideate independently. And then later you could bring them back. These are different ways of thinking about how AI can make us better, even make us better as a community rather than just as individuals.
I think that is such an important point. And the way that we're going to evolve this to interact with us instead of just give us the answer and give us a journey, a dynamic feedback journey where we can learn and grow together. I love that. I want to ask you about the data that you're seeing around jobs. So the fear-based media will say, hey, AI is here to take our jobs. But the data you're seeing tells a different story. And it's characterized by deprofessionalization of routine labor and the rise of a creative class to explore the unknown. And I would like you to just talk about that because it's going to go in stark contrast against what we keep seeing in the media.
Yeah, I mean, it really does boil down to one side thinking that C3PO is going to steal your job. And the other side saying, I literally heard someone at the Federal Reserve say, we've been here before. Don't worry about it. New technologies always create more jobs. First off, if everyone's saying the same thing, and I have heard that line so many times before, then immediately be skeptical of it. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that is a much more complex story. New technologies don't always create more jobs, but that is the trend. And here I genuinely believe, I'm not a futurist, so this is not intended as a prediction. I think we have every reason to believe that modern AI, deep neural networks, reinforcement learning, generative models, large language models, they will create more jobs. But they are of a fundamentally different nature than past automative systems. In the past, for example, you automate textile manufacturing with the loom. And yes, you put a bunch of weavers out of business, but you create the fashion industry and you create all the jobs associated with it. Admittedly, it took a solid 100 years to do that. It wasn't like the weavers became Christian Dior or something. And that's also worth understanding. There are huge, painful moments in history when these transitions happen. But we have more jobs. The problem here is not will there be more jobs? Who will be qualified? Because if that new job is routine labor, like the one that just got automated, then some jerk like me is going to build an AI to do that job too. That's what AI is fundamentally great at. In fact, arguably better than human beings in many contexts, is routine labor, even highly skilled, highly educated routine labor, like medical diagnostics and contract review and writing boilerplate code, things people notionally have to get advanced degrees to do really well and get those highly envied jobs. Now, again, free in your pocket. That's not going to differentiate you anymore. So take this as a bit of a thought experiment. You're running a multinational company. You've got 100,000 employees. This amazing new automation comes in and it automates out 80% of your work. But magically, not magically, maybe this is the intention, it creates 100,000 new jobs. But that new automation technology is AI. So the one thing you know about the new 100,000 jobs, they're all about the above that 80% skill threshold. Yeah. They're all high skill labor. Right now, I bet you are fighting tooth and nail with your competitors for those elite employees to fill those 20% jobs. Now you've got 100,000 more roles to fill. Are any of those 80,000 employees you just laid off ready for that job? I will say, as a deep believer in human capacity, they could be, but they are not. Right. And this idea that we're just going to create all these new jobs and, coal miners and truck drivers and factory workers will magically upskill into jobs surely they would have had already had they really had that skill set. That, to me, is the fiction here. And this process is interesting because even in this context, I still see lots of job creation. But interestingly, it's the exact opposite of what people imagine. It's not that those new creative jobs become what gets filled. It's actually the exact opposite direction. There are things that aren't worth having a computer do. Things that you could pay a human to do less than it would cost a robot. No one realistically, your local cafe is not going to put a bunch of robots in place of their servers. And hotels probably aren't going to start hiring robots to change all the sheets in their rooms when, frankly, there's a steady supply of very low-cost labor to fill it. So this process is deprofessionalization. Jobs that used to be higher skill slowly becoming lower skill because they can be done by, instead of a university grad, a high school grad with an AI helping them. I sometimes call this the Jiffy Lube economy. There was a time when your local mechanic was a high skill value added individual. And now most of what we do in our cars, really just require us to go in through a highly stylized automated process, and a bunch of people making probably a bit above minimum wage, but certainly not a middle class wage, service your car and you're out again. And there's no good reason to see that not coming in for the law and increasingly in medicine and beyond. So this deprofessionalization process means lots of jobs for everyone. But this divide, this massive chasm between incredibly high skill creative labor and low skill, but still high demand, but low pay labor. And we absolutely know where we want our kids to be in this divide.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be thinking of the whole economy. Who would possibly wish for their kids to be washing dishes, a job of which demand is going up? When instead we could think of a society in which we're all on that creative side. But it's not the trend. It's not the economic trend right now. So yeah, there'll be lots of jobs. Every indicator is lots of new jobs being created. But the ones we're dreaming of are going unfilled. And the ones we wouldn't wish on our enemies, that's the trend. How do we break that trend? I think is a big, big problem sitting directly in front of society right now.
There is a powerful debate that Alex and I refer to as my work versus AI's work. And you posted on LinkedIn that you were asked to advise in the writer's strike negotiations around the use of AI in entertainment. How writers should get compensated if they're using AI was one of the big issues at hand. And from your human-centered perspective, how should companies be thinking about incentivize employees versus penalizing them for the human AI collaboration?
This is interestingly complicated, but for me, probably not in the sense that you guys might actually be expecting. So the classic notion, particularly in liberal economic theory, is if people are more productive, they get paid more. That just it falls out of the equations. I don't think it necessarily always falls out of the empirical data that is true, but there is certainly is also a trend in history. So when you went from using the quill to the pen to the typewriter to the word processor, writers became more productive. Maybe not on pace with certain other fields, but it certainly is there that they can produce more. And I don't think anyone ever thought as a result they should be paid less just because it's easier using a word processor than a quill. On the other hand, AI coming into this means that in theory, a producer could go to GPT-4 or Claude 3 and say, here are some beats I'd like to see in a 6 episode series about the following theme. Give me some characters, give me some notes. And I said, there's actually a whole boutique industry on YouTube of people selling videos on how to write fiction like in a day using these tools. And the one thing to note is clearly what they're describing is a kind of a value add. A human was involved in noting a couple of the structural elements and the themes, but really all the work got done by the machine in terms of actual word production. And you might think, well, where really is the human value add there? And if you look at the equivalent of that world online, all of these low-paid content producers just produce 600 words, like spit it out. I need 600 words every 15 minutes. We're going to throw these articles in and, run ads against them and just generate lots of spammy content. Mm-hmm. You can see a deprofessionalization of writing in that space because no one's looking for high quality content. They're just literally looking for content of any kind. Oh. But I'll also note that I'm not going to pay for Hulu or Netflix if all I get is the same garbage rehashed over and over again. And as well as Claude 3 can write, compared to, both stylistically and punctuation and syntax. Oh my God, I wish even my grad students knew how to punctuate as well as it did. I still look at it as, wow, this is really banal writing. You can work with it and evoke from it something more interesting. But the default style, oh my goodness, I've experimented with using it in some of my own writing. Unacceptable, especially given everything I've said to this moment. Your value is your voice. I mean that metaphorically in other jobs. Here in writing, it's everything. What is the story only you would tell in only the way you would tell it? Guess what? GPT-4 can't produce that for you. It might be able to speed up some process, help with ideation, but it won't magically change that process. So to the degree to which it can speed up some of these elements, it's like the quill versus the word processor. Of course, you should get paid the same amount because it was your unique value add that was valuable, which, by the way, is entirely in line with how, for example, the US television industry thinks about it. I've heard all these interviews with showrunners in the US TV industry, and they'll say, like, there's 200,000 people in LA that could write a screenplay. What I need is not someone capable of writing. I need someone capable of saying something I wouldn't have said. That's what I'm buying. And ideally, they then make it sound like I said it because I'm the showrunner and it's supposed to be my show. That unique voice is the thing that I think, for all of its imperfections, Hollywood recognizes as valuable. And when the strike finally reached its conclusion, producers recognized, that writers, regardless of whether they're using AI or not, should get full credit for what they produced and should be compensated appropriately. And in that sense, I agree with what they're saying about it. But for my own purposes, I'm really saying, please, please don't let large language models start to chart the future of streaming. Oh, I am already so sick of reality TV and formulaic docuseries and, the same idea done before, but redone with a slightly different character. If that's, I guess, all you're after, and you didn't really add any value, I'd side with the producers. That person shouldn't get paid anything because they didn't contribute anything.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, no matter what your opinion of the Academy Awards, I did have the benefit. My wife and I went to go see the movie Poor Things with Emma Stone. And I could never imagine that movie being written by AI. I mean, it was such a unique and unexpected tale. And there was so much nuance in there and so much creativity in how it was brought to life and unconventional thinking and how it was brought to life. You would never think that an AI would say, hey, this is the formula for the next superhero movie in Hollywood. This is something really unique and different. On the other side of that, we've got, nearly 200 million people using ChatGPT on a monthly basis. And what Nate and I often talk about is using GPT and LLMs really through the lens of three things. As an assistant, as a strategist, or as a creative helper. And what you're talking about a lot is sort of how do we reverse engineer these use cases to get more out of ourselves, which is brilliant. And we love that. And that's very much in the ethos of what we're exploring, which is this convergence of human potential through the future of work, and how do we become more of ourselves in this digital age. And you talked earlier about using these tools for creative friction or as a critic. We're wondering, are there other surprising and unexpected ways that you're seeing or that you're recommending that people can use these products to get more out of themselves, to get more out of their own humanity and their own unique gifts?
in my work and research, we've looked at a number of different ways that AI can play a role in these processes. But then we also build it so that it does things they're not. For example, maybe the LLM is more resilient. When both of them are experiencing failure, the LLM keeps pushing. And it turns out, yeah, with real human beings, you put a really resilient person on a team and give it a few months, maybe even a couple of years, everybody on the team becomes more resilient, almost osmotically through peer role modeling. And so we get this, we can actually leverage, because LLMs seem so real and human for kids. It's almost like a VR experience that really can incorporate into their own behavior that pattern. I don't want to be like the mistakes, my robot buddy's making, but I do want to get some of the gains. And it's amazing how effective that can be. So there's a domain where it's not doing anything directly, it's just paralleling the person you're identifying. The last is, well, not the last, but another one I'll mention that we've alluded to before is context. This is the trusted advisor that, almost like the guru, the Socrates. They never give answers, but they ask you the right questions. And I think we can expand this one and actually refer back to one of your own examples, which is, I'm working on this story and I want a twist to come up. But the thing about a great twist in a narrative, including, let's say, an Oppenheimer, and I didn't know the fine details of his life story. So the twist, forgive the spoiler here, that it turns out his seeming supporter is actually his enemy the whole time. Mm-hmm. That it has the perfect element of a truly good story, which is I didn't necessarily see it coming. Okay, by the time it happened, I saw it coming. But early on, I didn't see it coming. But after the fact, it was inevitable. Of course, he was the source of all of this. And a great twist works this way. It retroactively explains all of the things and recasts how you see the problem. It's one thing just having an unpredictable event occurs. Wait a minute, some guy on a boat shot a ballista and it kills these indestructible dragons? No wonder everyone hates the final season of Game of Thrones. A surprise is not the same thing as good writing. Unpredictability is not good writing, but rather that quality of an inevitable change that you didn't see coming, but which actually transforms your experience. That's amazing. And it's there in science, and it is there in engineering problem solving, and in medicine, and in trying to understand how to go fundraise for your startup. All of those reconceptualizations of a problem. And I will say, the Socratic AI that never truly gives you answers, but can help you think differently. But it's not going to be the default. Hey, tell me something different, because it's what it will tell you. Any of them, the best of them, is what the average person didn't expect. But you're not the average person. If this is your field of work, you're already exceptional. You already know so much more. You need to create the persona that maybe in some sense understands the problem better than you, but understands it differently. And then evoke from that persona the twist you didn't see coming, but re-explains everything. That's hard work, but the payoff, it can be huge.
So one of the things that Alex and I have been learning a lot about is you get a lot better results from generative AI when you spend the time to train it on you. And you spend the time to train it on the context of you. This is who I am in the world. These are some of my demographics. This is what I do for my work. This is my philosophy. These are my values and that sort of thing. And in these nuances of training the model to help it answer more like you would answer, but then also what you keep saying is help it to be a better critic of you to challenge you. And that could be something that we'll see in future iterations of these as a setting, right? Where you just tell it, don't give me the answer. Help me become a better version of me. Help me think more critically. Challenge me to learn dynamically on the fly as a partner.
I didn't want to build things that people's brains could already do for themselves. Technology shouldn't just make us better when we're using it. We're better than where we started when we turn it off again. Clearly, my example of the AI tutors and the kids that didn't learn when they were given answers is an example of a system that, well, obviously the students had the answers when they were using the tutors, so in some sense they were better, but they were worse than where they started. And, for years and years, I've had this go-to example, which was originally a prediction and then was actually borne out in research, that automated navigation systems like Google Maps would literally lead to increased cognitive decline and increased rates of dementia, because navigating through space is a natural form of cognitive engagement with our world. And if we don't need to do it, then we're not using our brain, and there's consequences to that. So this idea from psychology of being shallow or being deep, shallow processing and deep processing. And so much of how we think about technology as entrepreneurs, as inventors, is about efficiency gains. How do we take the frictions out of our life? Well, I just told you what I love most about AI is the frictions it puts back in intentionally to make us better. And so in that context, that's a really transformative way of thinking about it, is maybe this AI could do it better than we can right now. But if we work together, we end up with something better than either of us could independently. And some of the coolest work in AI in medicine has had that as a finding. Some of the best work in creative fields in the application of modern large language models and generative models, generative image models have had that as a finding. I think in my own life, it really boils down to I want to increase my capabilities. And interestingly enough, to truly achieve that, I don't need the my AIs in my work doing all of the deep hard work and just leaving me with the shallow. I need to be the one going deep. I need it, in fact, to evoke the deep out of me, because nobody actually wants to do that work. It's hard, but the very thing I'm alluding to, going deep is hard. We don't want to have to only watch art house flicks. I do want to watch a Marvel movie every now and then. I admit I have zero interest in watching shitty reality TV, but I have my own escapes. But even them, I want to be smart. I want them to have deep moments. I will say freely and unsolicited, whenever I read something like, is this the end of the superhero movie? No, make good movies. If there's a superhero in it or not, if it's a good movie, I'm there.
Totally.
When trends go bad, it's because people are putting out shallow garbage. And I think we will see a whole lot of stuff spit out by AI that amounts to shallow garbage. And that's going to be unfortunate.
Synthetic
We're certainly
movies.
seeing it in the literary world already. Yeah, and now I think we're probably getting ahead of ourselves in processor capacity. But obviously, it is in theory possible to just describe to what are people already doing? I keep going back to these examples of people using AI in writing fiction, and it's almost all fan fiction, which is to say they're shockingly devoid of original ideas. They're almost all intentionally taking someone else's characters, just putting them in a different context, and then letting Claude or GPT write out the story for them. At which point, what are you adding into this process other than, the characters from Frankenstein now set in Legend of Zelda world? Okay, but I mean, there's this tiny bit of creativity there, but what have you added?
Like the Pope in the Balmain jacket on the Mid-Journey images and all these things that we're seeing. I mean, it's funny. Yeah, you're all the remix. And in my previous career, I worked in entertainment, and I remember an article that really struck me and that was sweeping through Hollywood at the time. It was John Landgraf, who was the head of the the TV studio FX, and it was a big kind of flag in the ground moment where he said, I think we're reached peak content. And now with generative AI, I would say we're not even close. So
no, I think the opposite, though. Again, this idea of deprofessionalization. I've used this example before. If you're a line animator, some animation director or the actual showrunner is saying, here's how this scene plays out. Here's the keyframes. Here's the characters, and you're just filling in the animation. Wow, that job is not long for this world. But if you're the animator, and again, not this shallow content, but you really have a story to tell. Now, like me doing my social science research that could take a decade and I can do it in 2 days now. Now, instead of, 6 months to go from conceptualizing a Simpsons episode to having a finished product, you could imagine that the showrunners of The Simpsons could spit out a new episode in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. You just got to get the actors to come in and do the voicing.
yeah.
All of the animation and so forth gets done, but that's because so much of that process really is routine work. And the creative work has those sparks of moment. I don't know whether I would describe it as a positive or negative, but if your job is doing what someone else tells you to do, then start looking for the job where you're the one who is the creative lead, because those are the good jobs. Those are the jobs that are going to still be present in the creative economy and be facilitated. So it's interesting when you say peak content, because again, if you see these tools purely as efficiency gains and spitting out shallow garbage, yeah, it's going to be schlock. But if instead you say, imagine all of those people with a creative spark finally able to bring it out into the world. Yeah, there'll be a lot of garbage. There will, because not many people currently have that sort of capability. But there is a potential for us. So here, I actually said this would be a complex answer 57 years ago in the interview, and I didn't actually finish the idea. Here's my dream workspace. The productivity gains allow us to turn every employee loose, or maybe little teams of employees, to work on the problems they think are important. And that could be 10 groups all working on the same problem. Can you imagine in a current workplace paying for those 10 people to all work on the same problem, knowing you might only use one answer? What a redundant space. But here, what we're going to find is the transformative answer. And the fact that those other contributors are peripheral contributors, they're going to change that long-term answer, but maybe their actual hard work isn't going to define the entire project. Right now, we don't pay for that. We have a system where someone says what to do and it filters down, and people execute on that. We get rid of that. Someone says why we're doing it, and then everyone else goes out and explores the unknown solutions to that why. They align around the why, but the what and the how they discover. And their discoveries may be conflicting. They may be competing with one another. But we allow that seeming redundancy to exist because the net results are so much better than the original system. We tap into the creative potential of the entire organization, the whole community that way. And it requires a very different way of thinking about this process, where everyone is a creative contributor every voice needs to get listened to, at least implicitly. And there's some, by the way, amazing tools. I alluded to one of my own, the Matchmaker, for building AIs that can listen across multiple groups and integrate and highlight where great new ideas are popping up. But what a transformation of thinking about the process. No one's doing the routine labor. Everybody's on the creative side. The AI is allowing them to tap into a level of productivity where we end up with the job getting done even faster, but not because, of deprofessionalization, but because we actually leaned into everyone's creative potential.
That sounds like a fantastic future. And the idea that people inside of organizations today can't even get an approval to work on the problems that they see in an organization. In this case, you're literally you're fostering the conditions for them to attack those kind of problems with all of their creative energy. That sounds like an awesome place
I
to be.
mentioned earlier, we as individuals don't like uncertainty. You can imagine what it feels like then as a notional manager or a leader within an organization. And I'm telling you, you have to celebrate it. You have to lean into not knowing quite what's going on. And I get it. It's terrifying. I don't think it's anyone's instinct is to move in that direction, but the people and organizations that figure that out will end up so far ahead of everyone else. I guess it's the biologist in me hoping that, evolution and the competition of the fittest plays out here, and we inevitably move in that direction. But the truth is, there is no inevitable here.
We're going to ask you to try to answer 5 questions in a minute or less.
Ooh, you already have a sense of my skill level at that, but I will give it an earnest go.
How is the AI revolution markedly different than previous revolutions?
The AI revolution is cognitive automation. And as we said already, all those new jobs that it potentially will create, by definition, will themselves be creative. So the question isn't whether AI creates jobs, it's who will actually be qualified to fill them. And that is a truly new question.
Vivienne, you are a self-proclaimed mad scientist and innovator who sees the world differently. What advice would you give to those following an unconventional path like your own?
Don't do what I did to get where I am. My path went through homelessness and unbelievable failure. But what that did was free me up to truly care about what I brought uniquely to the world. So skip the hardship and go right into you are unique. That makes you valuable. So have the courage to say that unique and valuable thing.
You have said this several times, and now I have to ask this question. When the answers are in every kid's pocket, what is that going to do to our education system and those kids?
It's going to demand an incredible transformation of that system. Who cares whether a kid can answer a bunch of rote memorization questions about equations or historical facts or syntax? What unique insight can they bring to an essay? So if the kids got this genius AI in their pocket, let them ask for an answer. Tell them that's the D answer. And all they have to do to get a better grade is to transform it into their unique answer.
Fantastic.
I like that.
It comes as no surprise to our audience, I'm sure, that you are a sci-fi movie buff and a storyteller at heart. What are 1 or 2 good news stories about our AI future that people don't know but need to hear?
I'm going to be super self-serving here.
Please.
One of my companies, Dionysus Health, has developed the first ever biological test for postpartum depression. And it's predictive, so you can take it before you've given birth and before the symptoms start.
Oh my God.
It is the most common complication in pregnancy. And despite the fact that probably everyone has heard the phrase postpartum depression, it gets no love and minimal support. Maybe 1 in 8 cases ever even get diagnosed. And it doesn't have to be that way anymore. And the only reason this test is possible is because of artificial intelligence, being able to analyze epigenetics at a level that never would have been achievable without this new technology. That's just one of innumerable examples. I got to build the first AI to treat my own son's diabetes. I built a system that united orphan refugees with their extended family members in refugee camps. We built a system with Google Glass behind me here to help autistic kids learn how to read facial expressions. When I say it's just a tool, part of what I mean by that is we get to choose how to use it and what we're going to do in the world. You can do bad things, but you can make an amazing choice to give someone else an amazing life.
That's beautiful. Wow. Let's have some simple fun with this last one. What is your favorite science fiction movie?
Wow. I mean, I was still a kid, but Blade Runner was a transformative experience. Just everything about it. I think maybe part of it is the idea that these artificial people could be just as human as us, different, but still human. And in my own work, building cyborgs, the idea, easy as it would be to assume I want to build the Borg and we all become more like computers, less emotion and everything. No, all of the things we are actually can be accentuated. Our loves, our likes, our reactions to the world. For me, a cyborg in theory is someone that is richer in all of the different dimensions that make us human. Because otherwise I'd just be building a thing to make us all more similar. And what's the value of that? Let's just build the AIs to do that. So Blade Runner, was transformative. And I suppose as a bit of a precursor, I have love for Dune, the original David Lynch Dune that a lot of people don't have, but it really is born out of love for the book, which is an imperfect book, but explored the ideas of human computers. And completely lost in the movies is the fact that this kid is not only this mystic reborn, God creature, but he's also secretly, without his knowledge, being turned into a human computer at the same time. And maybe even the best throwaway idea in all of science fiction, 1,000,000 years ago, there was a religious jihad, and that's why there's no AIs anymore. Because otherwise, frankly, Star Trek doesn't make any sense. Why aren't AIs doing all the decision making? We know it's possible because that was in an episode that happened. So why is it not real? What a clever idea. Such a real world human idea. There was a religious war and the AIs lost. And the humanity that exists today is the result of that jihad. And I thought that was one of the cleverer ways of dealing with a truly challenging, hard sci-fi problem.
I saw Dune 2, the new one, on opening night. You and I could probably spend another hour at least just geeking out about sci-fi movies. I've seen quite a lot, and I loved the new Blade Runner, the 2049. I thought they did a great job with that. I thought that was a really interesting update.
They added some unique setting insights, and they explored some new themes that weren't in the original. I was really quite fond of that. Again, sometimes these things don't get the love I think in some ways they deserve, but it really kept the spirit of both being a kind of poignant and human story, his struggle. Am I this being that everyone's searching for? And realizing that he wasn't, bit of spoiler, even though he wasn't a real human. How crushing to know you're just a part. You're going to make a sacrifice to preserve something, and no one's really going to remember you. Is it still worth it to do that thing? Does it mean enough to you to have made this sacrifice no one will ever appreciate, that you're willing to do it? And, to have this being go through that process, in a way which is exposed by virtue of him being a replicant. Yeah, that was big and moving to me, because I have a whole research area on the psychological construct called purpose. And it's about this amazing and almost paradoxical story that people that make sacrifices actually end up with better lives and create better communities. So that story really resonated with me, of Gosling's character going through that experience. If only they could have stuck in a good I'm Just a Ken musical interlude into the film.
It's funny, as you were saying that, I was thinking it reminded me in some ways of the bravery of your work, and that sometimes your work has achieved incredible recognition, but I'm sure there are plenty of instances where you're not sure whether or not it's going to achieve the intended result that you set out with, but you're doing it because you're passionate, because you believe in it, because it matters to you. And one fun fact about you, Vivienne, that our audience probably doesn't know, is that you self-fund all of these projects at Socos without grants, without taking equity and whatever the upside is. That you just do these things because they matter to you, and that is so beautiful.
Thank you. I had a rough, self-inflicted rough start to my life, and I got a second chance, and I've had the chance to analyze nearly 10 trillion data points in my life. And if they all told a single story, it is that if you want an amazing life, you have to give it to someone else. And every time I make the stupid decision of launching one of these projects, my life gets better. It shouldn't, but it does. So clearly it's all just my malevolent selfishness.
Vivienne, thank you. Thank you for being you, for being a mad scientist who's so passionate about this work, and for being brave enough to come at these problems from crazy angles that no one else would think of, and having the courage to stand there and say, I think there's something here, for devoting your life to this kind of work, for working on the problems that nobody else wants to work on or will try to work on. But then at the same time, you're also challenging us to, at this exciting time, to use these tools to make us better, to make our lives better, and to make humanity better. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not great at receiving gifts, so I will just say thank you.
Vivienne, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Well, if you want to read some stories about my work, you can visit socos.org, SOCOS.org. If you want to learn about something we didn't talk about at all, but a truly provocative idea, I think just like lawyers and doctors, we should have a civil right to AI acting solely on our behalf. And if you want to learn more about that, visit thehumantrust.org. And it's a new nonprofit launched for that purpose. And if you want to learn about postpartum depression, Dionysus Health, and all the amazing work we're doing there. And if I could throw one last plug in, OptoCeutics, a company started by a former postdoc of mine. I'm on the board. It's this amazing little, very fancy light bulb behind me, and we're working on a treatment for Alzheimer's and stroke recovery and other things. It is truly transformative. these are the kinds of things I get to work on in my life, and it's been an amazing one.
Thank you. Those are great places and things to check out, and it really is amazing how far and wide you're able to spread your impact. Really impressive.